when you play something like that, then you let it ring all the way out, 'cause it's like a meditation, so you're releasing it, and then if you get it out, it's good, so you might as well let it ring the whole time, unless, sometimes I like to bring the sustain pedal up so it kind of vibrates the strings. It mutes them, but gradually. So it can create an interesting effect. It's like canceling out certain harmonics, and other harmonics kind of shine through that. But it also gives this kind of zing, zipper-like sound that I kind of find interesting, or I have been over the time I've been playing these pianos. I guess this is it's like a Yamaha, kind of studio grand school piano. But yeah, I mean, they take pretty good care of them here. Take really good care of them. And the technicians who, I don't know, the students kind of, they're all right in them. Some of them get a little bit more, played a little harder than others, but I think it sounds pretty nice, honestly. It's fine for this. It's nice to be able to play full weighted, grand. It's got a satisfying sound to it. But I will play a quick example of that as a second piece, maybe. I'll do, not necessarily like a demonstration, but I'll illustrate exactly what I was describing in terms of release, or the end of the piece, instead of letting it sing and ring out, intentionally using the pedal to kind of sing on the strings a little bit. But I'll play it as a full piece. That'll just be at the ending of it. And that is to say that this previous piece is called lead climbing, and it was based on the idea of like rock climbing with a rope and harness, as opposed to like free soloing, or I guess I think is a term that I've heard referred to as, but basically it was like without climbing without any rope. So and it's just a concept that I'm exploring, or trying to express my experience of that feeling through a piano piece, I guess it was. So I had premeditated the concept and maybe had a general idea, but I had not played any of the piece beforehand. It was all an improvisation. So whether that was that the piece was all in my head beforehand, or that I like to think of it more as like I'm discovering it in real time, and just kind of unfolds in front of you. But that's not to say without practice. And so the one interesting thing that I thought about with this piece was there's this climber that I learned about, Adam Ondra, and amazing climber. If you don't know his work, I guess I would call it, you should check it out, Adam Ondra. And just because, yeah, he's an artist who expressed himself through climbing, seems like to me, and climbs at like a really high level. But what I found interesting about one of the particular video pieces that I'd seen of him climbing was about like I can't think of I don't want to get the difficulty level wrong, so I won't say it, but I think it's nearly at the top, if not the top of the highest difficulty. Like one of the climbers who had climbed this particular route before him, I think had spent somewhere between 3 or 4 years possibly learning it, practicing it before he climbed it. But what this climber, Adam Ondra, then proposed to do and did was to go and climb the same route of this high difficulty, but in the very first time. and with ropes. That's not to say without ropes, but it's lead climbing. So you have a rope and harness, and you clip into the bolts that have been pre-placed before you, so that if you were to fall, then you have safety and somebody belays you from below. But anyway, that's not to say that. So he studied the route, and he'd spoken with the other climber about how he had climbed it, and he mentally prepared himself for months, and visualized himself climbing the route, knowing all the moves, having all the moves memorized before he were to ever climb it, because his objective is to climb it the first time. It's like one time or nothing. It's like it's like almost some kind of fetish. It's like the cream, the very cream of the top. Climbing the most difficult, one of them rated as one of the most difficult lead climbs on the planet, and in doing it the first time, they call it flashing a route, flashing. So and he's kind of gets off on flashing really difficult routes, which I found very interesting myself. I don't know. That's all to say that this previous piece, as with my practice and most of what I do with the piano per se, not necessarily just the keyboard, but is, I'm not saying I'm trying to flash the most difficult pieces in the world. No, that's not quite what I'm doing, or trying to do. But what it is the same concept of just flashing a piece. It's like flashing a route. It's like to play it from start to finish and have it be a real piece that's living, and to basically to achieve all of the right hand holds and body movements necessary to climb to the top. And, if I were to try to think about the difficulty level, not on a universal scale, but on just like my own personal scale, because I'm playing just about every day in this same practice of improvisations, of just every day only playing something new. Even if some of that does incorporate, some scales or exercises to work out my hands, typically that's a part of the practice. And some days it's more than others, and some days I play more or less than others. And also, thinking, studying music outside of that. But, that's to say that for my personal difficulty level, it's like maybe that last one with where I'm at right now felt like somewhere about like a 6, maybe, which is 6 or 7 even, maybe. Yeah, because I felt really in control. And that was the point of the piece, was to kind of, at some point I was representing, at least for myself, to give myself some orientation within the piece. The left hand bass was the grounding, was the anchor. It was the belayer, who was making the right hand, the climber, feel safe and secure and grounded, while at the same time climbing and soaring, fairly high. And what became interesting to me as I started exploring that further was that each pattern, kind of arpeggiation that I would use, started to feel like a handhold, as if I were myself climbing a rock. And so then I just kind of was able to then continue to imagine and work with the bass as being this grounding force in the piece. And that was interesting, because then I knew where I was going. I was going up, and I knew how to get there, which was basically to move these short patterned handholds, arpeggiations, up the scale until I reached a sufficient height, and I knew where I was going, and I had figured it out. And once I figured it out, it was easy. So that made the grounding feel even more satisfying for me, as well as the hand holes moving out, because even as I was going up, I wasn't thinking in terms of notes necessarily. I was thinking partly about the shape of the pattern in my hand, because whether I'm in good shape or not, I play some, I could be in much better shape. But if you think of it like walking, it's like, well, you're doing it, okay? It's like maybe not you're going so fast, maybe not prancing along, but you're doing it and you're moving forward. Or it's like speaking, the communication, or ideas or emotions are flowing and they're sent out for a receiver. So, but all of that came to me within the piece. So there's time, there's space within there, especially with the way that the piece began and developed as this very quiet space, which I also found interesting because I thought that the piece, I always think it's interesting to try to play the piano as quietly as possible, as quietly as you possibly can, like to just touch it. So you'll see, even, I'll play it so softly that the hammer won't ignite the action, and so that it's just a muted note completely. There's maybe some sound of the wood slightly moving, but it's nearly imperceptible. And so, but then it's like throwing it's like bouncing a ball or something as lightly as you can off of it, like off the ceiling. Like think of laying on your back and throwing a ball at the ceiling, and you're just trying to get it to touch the ceiling as softly as possible. And so if you throw it too hard, obviously it's a bonk, it's loud. So, but that's kind of an interesting exercise, and maybe it's sort of playful, but there's also like there's a challenge to it, and it's a little bit game-like, but it's also very just kind of minimal. And sonically, I find it interesting because you can get the piano to make sounds that I haven't heard before. So my ears is pretty much drawn to those sounds. So, and also sometimes how it's interesting how they can seem to excite certain harmonics more than others, which is also an interesting part of the process. So even if I'm using the pedal or not. So that was a nice way for the piece to have started. And so that's a long way to say that I was going to play a little bit more and represent that singing pedal on the finish of the piece. And this one isn't necessarily about climbing or isn't related. It doesn't even necessarily have to be flashed, okay? So it's just more a representation of that particular idea. And why not throw some of the quiet in too? Because I was just talking about it, so it's like you can see here. That's louder, in the bass. Really sustained in the bass. See, even if you hit one too hard, it's still like, oh, well, that's nice, yeah. And it makes the piano more ambient, which I like. It's like a program for an ambient piece without the talking. With really sensitive microphones. Because that last one was so quiet, I don't even know if you could hear it. I could barely hear it. Heard that one. Ooh, yeah. Okay, so then when you also hear it, when you sort of ring out, it's somewhat satisfying. I think. And what if I build for something quietly too loud? You know, it's like, maybe that'll be really satisfying now because it's like, and the damper pedal's off. You know, so it's like, okay, for effect, maybe I'll start to build now as quietly as I can, and I'll open it up basically to as loud as I can, and then I have the piece in my head right now. I see it now, and now I'm gonna do it. So it did, have the ending with the sustain kind of, it meandered a little bit, but I thought it was a nice place to meander, so I just went with it. I did make mention, I was thinking, a little bit, just during that even, because you can't help but not, is that the physicality of the piano, and especially feeling it now because I've maybe, it's just coming off of Christmas break, so I probably need to get back into a little bit better shape. Although, I did play some, and I have been coming over here to play at night some, but yeah, I'm just gonna keep logging them, and we'll see where it goes. I'm kind of hoping that maybe some of them can enter some space travel realm, because it's something I've explored a little bit before with not exactly this kind of composition, but also, more lately I've been working on just kind of like more like landscape painting style pieces that where I'm working to use the piano to pursue. I'm using the piano to pursue more musical ideas that would typically be expressed with electronic instruments, synthesizers. So basically, in short, I'm trying to use the piano to create sounds that a synthesizer would make, but through using the pedal or sustaining pieces, but not necessarily or only that the pedal, which allows to stretch the note out kind of more, but also more like sequences, using it, playing arpeggios or similar to like a sequencer. And when you do them the bass, especially, you can get it to really sustain these low colors. They're these like their own forms. You don't really hear much of the individual notes. They all just kind of. So in that case, like for me, it's like, since it is sort of physical, I mean, especially if you're trying to play it loudly, I think the even better version of that last piece, which when I was like, oh, and I see it now and go, it's like, oh, but there is an intensity that you have to kind of psych yourself up to it before you go. And I was happy with that piece. I was pleased with it enough. Like I said, it was like found some nice space to be, so I just hung out there. But I think an even better version of the piece could maybe be expressed on a different piano, because this one, the pedal is pretty clean in terms of and I didn't realize that I don't play this one as often as some of the other ones, but you can even hear in some of the previous recordings, that I have when I've done that sort of pedal release. But I'll better showcase it another time. But to say that the form of that piece is basically is very simple. The arc is just started as quietly as you can, with patterns that are repeating at a rate hopefully quickly enough so that you distinguish them as a whole, rather than individual parts, more like a synthesizer sound. In a way, you're trying to use rhythm to do that. But I don't know, that's something I've been developing or working on personally, just for in my own hands, my own practice for a few years now. I'm sure, we'll see. My form seems terrible. My hands don't seem, but they're holding up. I don't know. It's like, I get worried. I'm like, oh man, there's probably people who saw you play the piano, and that would be just like horrified at your technique and posture, but I mean, some days feel looser than others, it's like, yeah, and that's why it's also good to do exercises, I think, sometimes, because it does help me to feel more relaxed and better hand position too. But I put in some decent time today. I'm not going to overdo it on the piano or on this piece. So, but yeah, I'm going to be trying to check in and just log some of what I'm doing in my own practice, I guess, to either to share or just even for my own practice, maybe. So, um, until next time, take care.